was for the commander, who was second in command to the Admiral. On the left is the Admiral's day cabin, where he worked, entertained, and ate. Whilst at service, Britannia was captained by 9 admirals and finally by a commodore. After a long, hard day in charge of a staff of some 19 officers and 220 yachtsmen, often working for 18 hours at a time, the Admiral could finally relax in here. The armchairs and sofa are over 100 years old and came from the previous royal yacht, Victoria and Albert III. When the royal family was on board, the Admiral would have all his meals with them in the state dining room. But when there were no royal passengers, the Admiral would dine alone in this room, allowing his fellow officers the chance to unwind away from the boss.
Please move along the passageway to continue your tour.
The first room on your left is the pantry, where the Admiral's meals would be brought from the officer's galley and served to him in his cabin. On your right is a typical officer's cabin, little changed since it was first used in 1954. Despite their high status, none of the officers enjoyed the luxury of an ensuite bathroom, making do instead with shared facilities. On your left, you can see the Admiral's bathroom, which adjoins his sleeping cabin. The bathroom, with its original chrome fittings, contains one of the few baths, and this, the working part of the ship. The sycamore veneered wardrobes in the sleeping cabin held the Admiral's immaculate uniforms, into which he had to regularly change, often up to 12 times a day, depending on his duties.
From here, continue along the deck, outside, until you arrive at the garage.
It was built in 1953. A garage to house the Phantom 5 Rolls-Royce, or occasionally the Royal Land Rover, was considered an absolute essential. But it was no straightforward task to get the vehicle on board. First, the car and its transporter had to be hoisted onto the special trackway that's fitted to the deck. Even then, it could only be squeezed into the garage by removing its bumpers. In more recent times, a suitable car could normally always be found in the country that the Queen was visiting, so the Rolls was rarely carried and the garage put to use as a beer store. Overhead you can see the pulleys or davits on which the Britannia's motorboats were stowed. The empty one carried the Raw Barge, which you'll see later on the tour. With a total of 10 boats and 18 life rafts, Britannia carried more craft than a warship. On this side you can see the activity boat, which was often used to take the royal family ashore for private picnics during the Queen's annual Western Isles cruise. Towards the reclined room was one of the Queen's favourite spaces on Britannia. It was a true family room and offered privacy from the rest of the ship. Here, Her Majesty liked to take breakfast and afternoon tea while enjoying the often spectacular views through the large picture windows. The Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh took a guiding hand in the design of the yacht, selecting furniture, fabrics and paintings. Today, their taste remains very much in evidence throughout the royal apartments. The bamboo furniture which you see in this room was bought by Prince Philip in 1959 during a visit on Britannia to Hong Kong. The wall panels with illustrations of former royal yachts cleverly conceal a drinks cabinet on one side and a record player and a game store on the other. The rum tub in the corner of the Sun Lounge dates from Queen Victoria's reign. It was used on Britannia to issue the yachtsman's daily rum ration up until 1970, when the Navy's rum issue was abolished. In between the windows, you can see the base of the mizzenmast, which cuts right through the Sun Lounge.
From the Sun Lounge, move through to the vestibule. The area...
Desperate for a cup of tea? Queen's favourite.
the sleeping cabins on the Raw Yacht, it has a single bed. When Britannia was being fitted out in 1953, the Queen decided to make use of the bed linen bought for Queen Victoria's bedroom on the previous Raw Yacht, the Victoria and Albert. The Queen's sheets were especially tailored to Her Majesty's preference, with a deep turnback and embossed with the personal monogram, H.M. the Queen. Above the Queen's bed, there is an embroidered silk panel, which was specially commissioned in 1953 at a cost of £450. The Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh's sleeping quarters consist of 2 suites with an interconnecting door, each with its own bathroom. The Queen kept many personal possessions in this bedroom, so that it truly was a home from home. But for an official state visit, Her Majesty, together with the 45 attendant staff, would bring on board around 5 tons of luggage. This included the Queen's clothes, accessories and jewellery, which were kept in the wardrobe room, also on this deck, under the watchful eye of Her Majesty's dresser.
When you finish looking in this room,
this Raw bedroom, together with the adjoining room next door, is a mirror image of the Queen and Duke of Edinburgh's bedrooms. While the Queen and Prince Philip's rooms were reserved for their use alone, the bedrooms on this side were used by other members of the Raw family. This is the only room on Britannia with a double bed, which was brought on board by Prince Charles when he honeymooned on the yacht with Princess Diana. When the royal children were small, this bedroom and the adjoining room were used as nursery suites. In addition to the 4 bedrooms on this level, there were a further 16 cabins on the decks below, which were used by members of the royal family and their guests. There was also a VIP suite consisting of 2 cabins with ensuite bathrooms and an adjoining sitting room. It was usually given to the most senior guests, and it was here that President and Mrs. Clinton stayed during their visit in 1994. The same suite was used by Mr. and Mrs. Patton on their return from the handover of Hong Kong in 1997.
when you finish...
Out to Her Majesty's, but reflecting the Duke's personal taste, has a more masculine look. Like the Queen, Prince Philip preferred to have blankets rather than a duvet on his bed. But as he did not require the same deep turnback, the Duke's sheets are slightly smaller. His pillowcases are the same size as the Queen's, but on his specific request, do not have the lace borders. Like all the single beds on the ship, the Duke's bed is a standard 3-foot model. If either the Queen or the Duke of Edinburgh required food or drink at any time of the day or night, they could simply press a button next to the bed, which would summon a royal steward to attend to their needs.
When you finish looking in this...
This room, known as the anteroom, together with the wardroom next door, formed the officers' main recreational space. Strictly off limits to the rest of the crew, these rooms were a sort of gentleman's club afloat. The officers would gather in the anteroom not only for drinks, but to watch television, listen to the radio, play games, or take part in Britannia's fiercely contested yacht quizzes. One memorable game peculiar to the wardroom was Wombat Tennis. This involved 2 teams, a soft toy wombat, and a great deal of noisy encouragement. The game commenced in earnest when the wombat was thrown up into the ceiling fan and the batting began. The wombat, which had been donated by a lady-in-waiting on the understanding that it would receive love and affection, generally came off the worse for wear. Another toy animal who made his home in the anteroom was the small wooden monkey. He arrived on board during the Queen's visit to Copenhagen in 1957, and although no officer was ever allowed to touch him, he mysteriously moved around the wardroom to be found in a different hiding place each day. Today, he's in the case behind the bar, hanging from the silver ship, which is actually the top part of a huge salt cellar, reputedly owned by the last Tsar of Russia. It was presented to the officers of the Victoria and Albert by Queen Alexandra in 1906. In the wardroom, Britannia's 19 officers would gather daily for meals and to unwind after a long stint on duty. This part of the room, with its elegant dining table, was where the officers ate their meals. Breakfast and lunch were more informal affairs, and the officers could come and go as they pleased. But dinner was altogether different. In the evening, the officers sporting the Red Sea rig, the traditional naval uniform at sea of a white shirt, black trousers, cummerbund, and patent leather shoes, would gather in the anteroom next door for pre-dinner drinks. Galley chefs, and the excellent wines brought up from Britannia's wine cellar. And for that touch of flair, the Royal Marines Band, when not on royal duty, would provide musical accompaniment to the meal. On formal evenings, tradition dictated that the officers took turns at saying grace, which had to be delivered in rhyme. At the end of the meal, the officers would stand to drink the loyal toast to Her Majesty the Queen. Grandest room in the Royal Yacht Britannia, the State Dining Room. Here, the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh entertained their guests in spectacular style. Through these doors have walked some of the world's most powerful figures to accept the ultimate honour, an invitation to dine at the table of Her Majesty the Queen. Sir Winston Churchill, Rajiv Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, Bill Clinton, Boris Yeltsin, Ronald Reagan, and Margaret Thatcher all have taken their place in history aboard this royal yacht. What made a banquet on board Britannia quite unlike anything else was the careful planning, the minutest attention to detail, and the impeccable style with which the whole affair was carried off. It took 3 hours to set the 56 places for a state banquet, when the position of every knife, fork, and spoon was meticulously measured with a ruler. The menus, which were printed in French long before Britannia set sail, were given to each guest to keep as a souvenir of a very special night. In earlier years, the dining room also doubled as a cinema. Then the large white panels at the end of the room would hinge back to reveal a film projector. The silver grey carpet could also be rolled up to expose a wooden dance floor beneath, although the last time this was used was for Princess Anne's 21st birthday celebrations. Today, the state dining room is still used for exclusive corporate hospitality, and companies entertaining on board experience the same meticulous attention to detail and high standards of service that Britannia is famed for. Around the dining room, you can see many of the gifts which the Queen was given during state visits with Britannia. On this side of the room, there are, amongst other things, a ceremonial pig killer from the New Hebrides and a wooden carving of a shark from Pitcairn Island, signed on the back by all the adults living there in 1971, descendants of Fletcher Christian, the leader of the Bounty Mutiny. Look above the alcoves on this side of the room, and you can see a long string of red feather money, bound at each end with leather. Given to Prince Philip in Santa Cruz in 1957 and was reportedly worth £15 at the time. There are 3 mementos ranged along the end wall in this part of the room. On the far left is a huge whale ribbon which Prince Philip picked up from a beach on Deception Island. Next to this is a sword dating from 1738 which was presented to the Queen by the Royal Swedish Navy. And on the far right is a narwhal tusk given to the Queen during a visit to the Northwest Territories. The glass display cases in the alcoves contain place settings from the royal dining table and gifts from Malaysia, Pacific Islands and Arabia, including a glittering display of swords and daggers. The last alcove on this side is home to, among other things, a stone figure of a man from Easter Island and a carved wooden tortoise from the Galapagos Islands. On the opposite side of the dining room there are slate daggers and spears from Papua New Guinea, steel drums from Trinidad, a glittering gold... The Duke of Edinburgh's sitting room was used principally as a study by both Prince Philip and also by Prince Charles. The same size as the Queen's sitting room, the teak-panelled walls and red leather-top desk lend a functional look to Prince Philip's study. Above the desk is a specially designed display case in which the Duke kept a model of HMS Magpie. This spacious and elegant drawing room served both as a place for the royal family to relax and as a reception room. For official functions, the drawing room, together with the anteroom and dining room, could accommodate up to 250 guests. The drawing room is comfortably furnished with chintz-covered sofas and deep armchairs which sit on a luxurious Persian rug. The Queen originally requested an open coal fire in this room, but as Navy practice demanded that a sailor had to be on standby with a fire bucket at all times, this option... known as the Queen's sitting room, it was really more of an office, for this was where the Queen would work on state business and meet with her private and press secretaries to discuss the fine detail of forthcoming royal visits. Even at sea, official affairs took up several hours of the Queen's day, and the red boxes containing state papers were flown or shipped out to Britannia, no matter where she was in the world. The 2-metre-long built-in desk with its green leather top was where the Queen sat to work, and here the royal writing paper, pens and blotters were kept. Above the electric fire is a mirror in the style of a ship's wheel, topped with a gold crown, the centre of which is positioned precisely at the Queen's eye level. The original sofa was used in HMS Vanguard in 1947, when the King and Queen, accompanied by Princess Elizabeth, travelled to South Africa. The 4 elaborate light brackets, painted in gold leaf, came from the steamship Gothic, and the built-in bookcase at the end of the room housed many of the Queen's personal books.
Now move across to the opposite side of the staircase to see...
It was reflected in everything from the food served to the sleeping arrangements. Halfway down the pecking order came the petty officers and Royal Marine sergeants, and this was their mess or living quarters, with their sleeping area adjoining. This first room with the bar in the corner was where they would relax. The atmosphere in the mess was notoriously friendly, and all who set foot in here could be guaranteed a warm welcome. An invitation to have a drink here was highly sought after, especially by the Buckingham Palace staff when they were on board. Like the officers' wardroom, the walls of the petty officers' and sergeants' mess were lined with signed photographs of the royal family. During the Queen's Western Isles cruise around the northwest of Scotland, the usual strict protocol on Britannia was relaxed, and then the Queen and other members of the royal family would be entertained by the petty officers in here. Over 20 petty officers served on Britannia with responsibilities ranging from radio supervisors and marine engineers to stewards and cooks. In addition to them, this mess was also shared by the Royal Marine sergeants, some of whom carried out security duties, while others formed part of Britannia's band. As you continue on the tour, you will walk through the sleeping quarters of the petty officers and sergeants. Conditions here were cramped and privacy non-existent. Accommodation for each man consisted of a bunk which folded up into a seat for use during the daytime, and a locker where he kept his possessions. However cramped these conditions appear, they were a great improvement on the previous hammocks which were used up till 1970, when the Royal Yacht underwent a refurbishment with major changes to the accommodation on board.
From here, continue through into the Royal Marines Barracks.
surrounding area for terrorist devices, which would dive daily under the hull of the ship to make security checks. But perhaps the role for which the Royal Marines were fascinated was as Britannia's band. 26 bandsmen of the Royal Marine Band Service, all trained musicians, who embarked to play whenever Britannia was abroad duty. Their repertoire was vast and varied, and in addition to being able to play preferably the national anthem of each country the ship visited, they could also turn their hand to every type of music from classical to caving. A faultless performance was always demanded of the Royal Marine Band. This elegant white-panelled room was the Warrant Officers' and Chief Petty Officers' mess. As the most senior yachtsmen on board, the Warrant Officers and Chief Petty Officers had their own mess with separate sleeping quarters, some of which you can see as you continue the tour. The Chief Petty Officers were responsible for overseeing a range of activities. 2 worked in the medical department, while others worked in the communications room, dealing with classified and encrypted messages for the Queen. 9 of the Chief Petty Officers worked in the engineering department in charge of the engine room, boiler room, and auxiliary engineering equipment, while others, in the supply department, were in charge of catering and provisions for the ship's crew. The alcoves in the panelling were designed to house sculptures of 2 great seafaring legends, Sir Francis Drake and Admiral Horatio Nelson. As in the other mess areas, the bar was the focus of the room. However, as senior yachtsmen, the Warrant Officers and Chief Petty Officers were allowed to have spirits in addition to beer in their mess.
From here, exit through the door and continue along the passageway. As you go, you can... These are some of the sleeping quarters of the Chief Petty Officers.
This tiny room was a large part to play in keeping Britannia a happy ship. For this was the mail office, where Britannia's post was brought to be sorted when the ship arrived in a new port. With the officers and crew away from home for long stretches, keeping in touch with family and friends was a huge priority, and the arrival of the post on board Britannia was eagerly awaited by all. It was always hoped that mail would be waiting whenever and wherever Britannia. Ship's doctor looked after the officers when the Queen travelled on Britannia. She was attended by an all surgeon for the President. But also to double. When Britannia was built in 1953, the ship was designed to serve not only as an official royal residence, but also to double as a hospital. Estimated that up to 200 patients will be associated with the laboratory operating, and it is always the name of the post that Britannia has estimated the number of patients 24 hours. It is now This was probably the one place where no member of the crew ever wished to visit, for the ship's sick bay and adjoining operating theatre with their original 1950s fittings have an austere and slightly ominous appearance. The sick bay had accommodation for 2 patients in the cot beds, with a further 2 bunks contained within the bench seat. In overall charge was the principal medical officer, who headed up the medical department on board Britannia. He was assisted by 2 chief petty officers, one in charge of the sick bay, and the other a trained physiotherapist. Directly in front of you is the doctor's consulting room, with the operating... Britannia was the only ship in the Royal Navy to have a laundry permanently manned by her own crew. The laundry was also larger than would be usual for a ship for this size. The extra capacity was required should the yacht ever have been converted to a hospital ship. When the ship was on royal duty, the 240 officers and yachtsmen might regularly expect to change uniform up to 6 times a day. With such vast quantities of washing, the laundry machines, dryers and steam presses worked non-stop around the clock. The royal family's laundry was also done here. However, a carefully scheduled rota ensured that their washing was done on different days from that of the officers and the yachtsmen. One of the petty officers was in charge of the laundry, and he worked with a staff of 8 royal yachtsmen to ensure that all on board were immaculately turned out. Most of the equipment which you see here today was originally fitted in 1953 and proved very reliable right up to the time that Britannia was decommissioned. The laundry was a hot and noisy environment, and when Britannia sailed to the tropics, temperatures here were known to soar up to 45 degrees Celsius, or 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Up to 600 shirts alone would pass through the washers and dryers in one day. The laundry operated as a non-profit-making venture, and to cover costs, a small charge was made to wash and press each item of clothing. A shirt was charged out at a cost of 6p, and a tropical white uniform at a charge of 22p. The crew of Britannia always prided themselves on never making mistakes. This, of course, could never be totally true, as even the best-laid plans sometimes went astray. This happened on one occasion, when the royal washing turned a delicate shade of blue, and Her Majesty's dresser was less than amused. The cause, it turned out, was a chemical reaction in the copper pipes, which was quickly remedied by adjusting the pH value of the water.
When you've finished looking around the laundry, exit via the door, which will take you onto the...
This is the Raw Barge in which the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh travelled ashore when Britannia was anchored at harbours around the world. The Queen and Prince Philip sat inside the air-conditioned cabin, which was specially designed to ensure that they could be clearly seen as they approached the shore. When the Queen was aboard, the Raw Barge would be crewed by 5 men and escorted by one of the motorboats. The barge was built by Captain Nicholson in 1964 to replace the previous Raw Barge, which had originally belonged to the Royal Yacht Victoria and Albert III. It is 12.5 meters, or 40 feet long, and has 2 125 horsepower engines, which are capable...
See,